Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 20 of season 4 of Babylon 5 Endgame. Marcus is holding Ivanova's hand, but she is completely unconscious by this point. Delenn arrives and it takes a few attempts to get through to him to tell him that the transport has arrived to take Ivanova back to the station. Marcus identifies the near futility in removing her from the battle when she's dying anyway, but Delenn says she needs to have every comfort available to her in her final hours. Marcus struggles to let her go as they prepare to move her. November 1st, 2261, Franklin's personal log. The Resistance is on the move to take the actions necessary to liberate Mars and Earth. Number 1 introduces Franklin to their contact for the staging area. She's given clear instructions that one telepath is to be loaded onto each of the ships in orbit, no more. She's puzzled as to what the point is, having anticipated weapons or bombs to take up, but Lita says that's their concern, not hers. Franklin says they'd have been detected. If she can get the telepaths past the bioscans, they should do fine. There's almost enough for their whole fleet. Garibaldi's out on a pretty convincingly rendered surface mission. Although wearing a breather, the rest of his suit is pretty light, so some terraforming has clearly been done. He's scouting a secondary target with 3 others, and tells the Resistance to give them a couple of hours to reach it on foot. We watch as an atmospheric shuttle takes off from the scouted base, ascends to orbit, and approaches a substantial fleet of Omega-class cruisers. Our attention then shifts to one of the bunkers around the base, where an operative on the inside quietly gets her breather ready as they lose comms with another bunker. She then assists as the Resistance storms the bunker by breaching the airlock, which encourages cooperation from those not wearing breathers. No warnings have been transmitted, and the Earth Force personnel are quickly led away once cuffed. The Resistance should now control the perimeter, which is ironic as the bunker commander was anticipating them making such a move just moments earlier. Franklin begins to prep Lita with equipment as Garibaldi scouts the area. Sheridan's attack fleet, consisting of a wide variety of ships from various races, is ready to go. Marcus commands a White Star for Phase 1, ready to move on Garibaldi's go signal. League ships will only fire if fired upon, and will otherwise simply provide support and tactical assistance. Sheridan acknowledges to the Agamemnon's crew that this will be more trouble than they've ever seen, but he hopes they'll never have to see it again. On board the Apollo, the Earth Force captain confirms receipt of their final supply run. A general who was Sheridan's teacher in the academy is actually in charge of the Apollo, not because of any negative view of the captain's capability, but because he knows how Sheridan thinks, and simply does not believe that you should go against orders. Interestingly, this is the same General Lefcourt who congratulated Sheridan on his success against the Black Star during the Earth-Minbari War. He opens a channel to the fleet, advising that friend and foe systems have been updated for defecting ships, and to not think of them as ex-colleagues but as enemies to be destroyed, nothing more. They anticipate the enemy coming in from hyperspace imminently. Franklin makes final preparations on the equipment to give Lita the connections she needs. She has to go outside because she's broadcasting so far. She needs a clear, unobstructed shot at it. The team isn't keen on this, but lets her go. Garibaldi confirms the coordinates for the Wicked Queen's castle. Marcus is thinking of Ivanova again in the near notes, and he just says she would have wanted to be here, but maybe the station can help her. It is, after all, the final refuge for last hopes. Lanier believes the Minbari doctors know what they were doing, however. Marcus has put a call into Dr. Hobbs in Franklin's absence to double check, but Lanier tells him there is nothing usable on Babylon 5. Marcus immediately picks up on the word usable, but they are then interrupted by Mr. Garibaldi's attack data. Their White Star breaks off from the fleet. Garibaldi advises his team on the surface to get their breathers on in case the jump point forming blows out the windows. This is met with incredulity by the mole, as opening an atmospheric jump point is deeply unwise, but Garibaldi is pretty certain he didn't confuse his longitude with his latitude. In any event, it no longer matters as a vortex forms, sucking in atmosphere, and Marcus's White Star joins the fray, laying waste to ships on the surface. It's impressive to see one skimming the surface of Mars as Lita instinctively ducks, but a local defence turret starts locking on before Number 1 urgently calls for the base's own defence grid to take it out, which it does. On board the Apollo, the attack and others like it from the Resistance are noted but dismissed as diversionary tactics intended to keep them in the gravity well, although the General acknowledges that for the action to have started, Sheridan must have an ace in the hole, which of course he does. as he instructs Lita to activate the packages. As the telepaths awaken, Franklin says they'll do what the Shadows program them to do and merge with the machines, in this case the opposing Omegas. The Mole is aghast at this, at a doctor using people as weapons, but he notes that each of the 30 destroyers has 1,000 people on board, and they are weapons. It's 30 to save 30,000. Without the resources on Earth, the telepaths will never be free of the Shadow wetware, so it has to be done. They're fighting for Earth, they just don't know it. With the packages delivered and Lita having flipped to her enhanced mode, Sheridan orders the fleet to jump into Mars space. Of the 35 Omegas, Delenn reports 20 are out of control, 5 others showing signs of going that way. The remaining 10 are targeted by White Star tactical squadrons with a view to crippling their engines and weapons. Fire teams move to identify the onboard problems and eliminate them. Some League ships remain behind to assist any Omegas that need it, while Sheridan's fleet re-enters hyperspace on a course for Earth's beacon, confident that they cannot be assaulted from the rear. Marcus is ordered to rejoin the fleet, but cedes helm control to Lanier as he goes to check on a few things, namely having the computer search Babylon 5 records for terminal illness, death, and extreme measures. As they enter hyperspace, the computer responds and he forwards through entries until he arrives at Franklin's report about he and Sheridan using the alien healing machine to revive Mr. Garibaldi after he was shot in the back at the end of Season 1. Marcus orders all the reports downloaded to his password and a shuttle prepared. Delenn is surprised to see Lanier entering her command centre. This puzzles him, as he says that she sent for him. She didn't. Lanier immediately realises what's happened, simply saying, "Marcus," as they watch his White Star turn around and vector away from the fleet at speed. Delenn calls John on Channel 4, a nod of the head to the UK channel that broadcasts the show, and advises him mainly in private of their suspicions. It's now impossible to call the station due to Earth jamming, and they're at the point of no return. There's nothing they can do. Sheridan orders the final jump back to Earth space and starts to broadcast the fleet's intention. That on behalf of an interplanetary alliance, the civilians killed by Clark's actions and the Earth units that have joined them, they aim to free Earth from darkness and Clark's tyranny by arresting him and disbanding Nightwatch, returning Earth to her people. We see Clark writing something at his desk as Sheridan speaks. The planetary defense grid satellites start to track Sheridan's fleet as he urges those on the ground to take action against Clark, as his forces have been lured away from Earth and disabled. Their time to act is now. And they are acting, even as the satellites start to open fire on the fleet, with Star Furies and White Stars trying to deal with the incoming missile salvos. The destroyers are ordered to fire on the weapon platforms themselves. Just before the ground team reaches him, Clark suicides himself, but not before having sent a command to the defense grid. A senator puts the pieces together and calls Sheridan. Clark has written the word "scorched earth" by circling letters in a document. She believes he intends to use the defense grid to attack Earth, the particle beams being capable of levelling 40% of the planet's surface, with no way to stop it from the ground. Sheridan orders the fleet to press its attack and calls in Delenn to support. They have 10 minutes. And so comes a sight that is a complete reversal of the Battle of the Line, as Minbari fighters form wings with Star Furies to take down the weapons platforms. Nevertheless, the Agamemnon takes heavy hits along with other destroyers, and ultimately it is unable to fire when Captain James notes that a platform is charging to fire on the eastern coast of North America, and they're the only ones close to it. Sheridan returns to the captain's chair and grimly orders ramming speed. The Agamemnon surges towards its target with its launch bay burning, but moments before impact a jump point opens right on top of them, and the Apollo enters the fray, opening fire immediately on the platform as it warns Agamemnon to hang on. The platform goes up from the weapons fire, and Delenn gasps as the Agamemnon disappears from view in the detonation, before it ploughs through the explosion, singed but not destroyed. No platforms remain. The General apologises for the delay, saying he had a little trouble at Mars, and whilst he says Sheridan will have to stand before a board of inquiry, he welcomes him home. Captain James says Sheridan's wanted at Earth Dome as soon as possible. However, it turns out it'll be interesting. Franklin and Delenn have other matters to attend to. Franklin is trying to get clear of the still active jammers to try and get a message through to the station. An emotional, original ISN reporter returns to the airwaves over a year since she was last able to freely broadcast, effectively recapping the events we've just witnessed, while saying that information on losses on both sides of the conflict is being made available, and urging all to remember that they are sons and daughters of Earth who now need to come together once more to heal. Franklin and Lanier are on the outbound White Star, still having no joy getting through to the station, and Franklin reviews the logs Marcus looked at. We see in flashback Sheridan and Franklin preparing to revive Garibaldi as they did early on in Season 2, noting that prolonged exposure to the machine could be fatal for the one providing the healing energy. In the closing moments we return to the station and scenes of wreckage in Medlab, where Marcus has clearly removed any obstacles in his path and set up the alien healing device to transfer his life force to Ivanova, saying "I love you" to her as he shuts his eyes. She does not respond. So there we are. Huge turnaround from the knife edge we've been on for the last couple of episodes. Sheridan's plan comes to fruition, whilst Marcus has plans of his own, of course, thanks to that Minbari habit of being quite open with the truth. I just finished a review of the In the Beginning TV movie that you can watch straight after Season 4, if not before, and I was smiling because here the General was also the same actor and character in the Beginning, and he's been aged up here because he was relatively young in the Beginning. It seems he never got past General, interestingly. I don't know how common that is in the military, but this is decades later. The newly enhanced fleet composition is quite remarkable because the Narn cruiser is mixed in with the Centauri cruiser, not normally comfortable bedfellows. It's interesting because the General orders his fleet to attack both human and alien ships, which is a bloody stupid order to follow, given what happened last time they opened up on Minbari ships, after all. In the end, of course, we don't really see much activity from that fleet, as the White Stars make very short work of it, and their chain of command is pretty wrecked by the Apollo's comms being successfully disrupted. It might have been interesting to have had the Apollo still active. So, we see just how critical the Mars resistance was to Sheridan's overall plan, and I wonder if he had a chance to speak to them before he escaped from Mars last episode. There's the great little moment where Garibaldi and Franklin are wondering if he's got the coordinates for the White Star strike right. I remember the debate on the news groups about that. We had a precedent set for an atmospheric jump in messages from Earth, and this is just a relatively thin atmosphere. Minbari jump systems are very accurate. The whole rendering of the Mars scene is absolutely superb. I love the White Star being in such close proximity to the surface and still sliding around like it just doesn't care. There are a few really nice effect shots like that in this episode as we climb out of atmosphere, plus of course lots of booms later. Although quite why the satellites would detonate as if they're full of a flammable gas, I don't know. Pet peeve of mine. Also interesting that we see missiles, very sort of traditional missiles used for maybe the first time in the entire series, and you know they have a really sort of devastating impact on the Earth destroyers because they can take out Star Furies, you know, by themselves very easily because there are so many of them that some do get through the fighter screen and cause a lot of damage to the Agamemnon, which also causes damage to Sheridan on the bridge. It's not a sort of a method of attack we've seen a lot of in the series. It tends to be more energy-based weapons, so it's actually quite interesting to see in sort of fairly traditional ordnance being used to sort of this much effect. So we see the telepaths being used as we might have expected, but there is the interesting question of whether this is a moral thing to be doing with them. They've given no consent after all. Ends justifying the means, it seems. And once again, Leeta is utterly critical because the commander of the bunker reckons this fleet is on a par with the Battle of the Line fleet. I'm not convinced of that, but we are talking 35 Omegas, which is a serious amount of more modern firepower, so maybe he's not that far off. Being able to disable them without suffering heavy losses is very much Sheridan's ace in the hole, as the General anticipated, and while Sheridan hasn't flinched in taking down Earthships when he's needed to, this is obviously a far more efficient way to do it, and no one defending the home system is likely to defect. Is it believable that one officer was able to get a telepath onto each of 30-odd ships? Pretty sloppy security, if so. Hugely risky too. Just one being discovered a little too early would have led to all the others being found too. So would have basically crippled the whole plan. So there's a what if for you. The final battle in Earth space is preceded by a really excellent speech from Sheridan that really pulls everything into perspective as to why they're there doing something which appears traitorous but is actually the complete opposite. Classic JMS speech writing, which I totally bought as something Sheridan would say. And yes, I was tearing up a little because we often see the real world examples where we wish something like this could happen to try and right wrongs. There's always that grey area, of course, with even the general saying Sheridan can't necessarily expect to come out of this with entirely clean hands, even as he welcomes him home. I also remember when somebody pointed out that having a joint strike force of Minbari and Earth forces in Earth space trying to save the planet was just such a complete turnaround when you consider the Battle of the Line and the whole focus of the first season. Over the course of 4 years, we've moved from Starferries being destroyed en masse by Minbari fighters and cruisers to their flying alongside one another to destroy a global threat to Earth itself, which ironically the Minbari once posed themselves. So there are a lot of feels going on here, and Sheridan takes a few licks in the process as the Agamemnon takes some solid hits, and we get the ramming speed trope that comes up from time to time. I can't knock it here though, with the music and the last minute save from the Apollo. It does work really well. The ISN piece is very cleverly done, outlining what the original ISN crews went through as their ability to broadcast was curtailed and their comrades imprisoned or worse. That's quite a big shift for us as well, because it's the same newsreader actress as it was in Season 3 as ISN was forcibly taken off air, which is terrific continuity for long-time watchers of the show. And over the last year we've seen how ISN became just another pawn in Clark's arsenal of misinformation and disinformation. So we do share in her emotion, which, whilst it may not be professional as such, is wholly understandable. And of course her report on events is far more measured than would otherwise have been the case had things gone the other way. And then of course there's Marcus's piece of the jigsaw, with Lanier giving him just too much information so that he can sacrifice himself for his one, if not the one. For all the successes that we see in this episode, this is the counterpoint, I suppose. We don't even know if the machine was able to bring her back this time. Even Garibaldi probably wasn't this far gone. She may not even have heard his expression of love for her, although she has probably known for some time that he has feelings for her. Another personal relationship point that comes out of this situation is that the singer Franklin had a relationship with Caitlin, passed away from the illness that had been affecting her. It's just a little point of detail dropped into the episode from an episode that now seems a very long time ago, just like the flashback to Sheridan and Franklin discussing Garibaldi's treatment with the alien healing machine over 2 years prior. All of these elements demonstrate both the overall planning of the show and the remarkable pacing of this episode when you consider just how much content has been packed into this one episode, along with all these little points of detail. You could easily have stretched this into a 2-parter all its own, and yet of course there's that time pressure with a question mark over the last season running. So instead what we have is a remarkably compressed yet still beautifully played out episode that could very well have been the final episode of the season. Only of course it isn't, because we still have 2 whole episodes left, which suggests that the end of the Earth Civil War is not the end of the story for the last of the Babylon stations. See you for the penultimate episode next time.